I always find it really interesting because we get that really dramatic music, and then when the dramatic music ends, it's just us. So, hello everybody. That you're at Starfleet Tactical because it's Saturday night at 10 p.m. I'm Chris Weave. I'm here with Pat Doyle. We have Alec Peters is producing the show, but I think what's going on is that he's still in the land of sort of dodgy internet. So he can do the special effects stuff, etc. But when he becomes an on-screen personality from his home, occasionally eat that. And so it's just easier for him to not do it. So I have at least one person saying no video. Does everybody else see video? Or is it just my brother who doesn't have video? Maybe he's listening to this on his phone. Maybe that's what's going on. So in any event, before I forget, I have been asked to let you all know that that the Axanar channel is not going away. It's still going to be around but it's going to be, I think they're going to limit it mostly to just the Axanar specific stuff, and the other things like Starfleet Tactical are just going to be on the Aries Studio channel starting sometime in the near future. So
I believe you said New Year.
New Year. Okay, well, that would be the near future. A customary time to make big changes. So that's a big change it's going to make. So if you're not watching this on the Aries Studio channel and you are watching it on YouTube, you should go and subscribe to the Aries Studio channel so that you can still get updates, et cetera, for this. It's probably also worth pointing out that it's certainly the case for me, and I believe it's also the case for Pat, that nothing we say during this show should be considered to be the opinion of any employer, past, present, or future. Most of my employers in the past really didn't have any opinion on how combat in Star Trek works. The current employer might, actually, but I haven't asked them, and I'm not going to bring it up. So in any event, that's what's going on with us. Pat, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Been a good busy week. So
nothing's really changed in 15 minutes since I talked to you last.
No, not in the last 15 minutes. No, not at all. But no, it's been a good week. Went flying. Spent the week flying back and forth. Actually, just flying back and forth between Detroit and Lansing, Michigan, and that's a 15-minute flight. So we have to do the same amount of work, whether it's a 2-hour flight or a 15-minute flight. And so yeah, it was a lot of really busy flights trying to cram everything into that. So, but it was a good time.
And knowing how checklists and timelines work, I'd be willing to bet that the takeoff checklist and the landing checklist probably overlap during portions of that flight.
Well, not quite, but I mean, they happen pretty much right afterwards. So we have an after takeoff checklist, and then we have a climb checklist, and then we have a descent checklist, and then we have an approach checklist, then we have a landing checklist, then we have an after landing checklist, then we have a shutdown checklist, and then if we're putting the plane to bed at night, we have a secure checklist. And so that's everything from after takeoff to landing.
Okay.
So there's a few others before you take off.
So for what it's worth, this is how the world works in both aviation and in the military. You've got checklists for everything. In fact, there's one series of books by I think I've mentioned them previously, but you never know who you got, so I'm going to mention them again, by a guy named Scott Geyer, the Ganellan series, of which the first 3 books were published by Del Rey, and then they stopped publishing the series, and a 4th book was published by Michael McCollum's Sci-Fi Arizona, an independent publisher, who was also a former Del Rey author who got cut from the mid-list. But in any event, in that, very early on, I could tell that the author was a military aviator. I guessed that he was a military aviator, and that's because anytime somebody who was a pilot did something, they always did the exact same steps in the same order including the radio calls.
Mm-hmm.
It was like clockwork. It's like he just cut and pasted the same paragraph in, and it's like you could just watch the characters going through the checklist. And that's one of the reasons why things like Starship Troopers, the movie, just drives me batshit crazy, because you've got what's her name feeling particularly perky that day, and so she pulls a stunt that would have gotten anybody, any actual pilot, grounded. Almost got the equivalent stunt. Almost got Alan Shepard grounded. He flew underneath the Bay Bridge, and that was considered a no-no. And they basically said, "You're really, really good, and that's why we're not throwing the book at you. But I'm holding the book and I'm winding up." So,
well, as I was reading about it, even in training in World War II, even if you were a fighter pilot, if you were doing hot dog type stuff, they're like, yeah, "We don't need you. You're just going to get a lot of equipment killed and a lot of people killed and equipment destroyed." So
I like that line from the Starship Troopers book that went something like, "We don't care about you, but that fancy suit you're wearing is expensive."
Yeah,
which clearly wasn't the case. They clearly cared about him, but sergeants are sergeants, right?
Yeah.
So one of the other things that I made the comment to Pat, I was going to point this out, that we do this almost every week. So as a general rule, Pat and I have a conversation about, sometimes it ends as late as 15 minutes or 10 minutes before the show starts. But, say 30 to 120 minutes before the show, we'll have a conversation about, hey, what are we going to talk about tonight? We usually talk earlier in the day. We've talked at some point during the week about who's going to take the lead. And we're still sort of in the position where Pat's taking the lead when he's got the time to do it, when he's not busy flying or, stuck in an airplane or in a hotel with crappy internet, et cetera, because we know that it's only a matter of time before that happens.
I actually had that experience, as a matter of fact, in Lansing. Yep. My computer would not pick up the hotel's internet. My iPhone or my iPad did, but not my computer. So yeah, there will be cause for improvisation at some point in the future.
Yeah. So basically, I've got some topics in my hip pocket. If Pat says, "Hey, I'm really busy this week, I can't do it," I'll jump in. If at the last second Pat can't make it, I can jump in and be the primary. And if we discover that like Pat's doing 90% of the work, we'll balance. But we're sort of starting with the assumption that at some point Pat's life is going to go to shit, at least on Saturday nights, and I'm going to have to do more work.
That's right. Pure glamour, everybody.
Yeah. And so, but we talk like 30 to 120 minutes before the show to sort of like, hey, what'd you do today? How are we going to start this, et cetera, et cetera. And we always end up having this interesting conversation. And at some point I'll usually say, yeah, let's do this on the show. Let's do this on the show. And so, today I even said, and I'm going to tell them about how we always do this. So the interesting conversation that we talked a little bit about game design. We talked a little bit about Pat's War Room game. And we talked a little bit about some other stuff that Pat's been doing. So Pat, you told me before that your War Room game hasn't really moved forward because you haven't played since the last time you told us about it, right?
Correct. War Room. It's a World War II game. I don't know if probably many of you at some point in life have played Axis and Allies. I believe it's the same designer. Yeah. It's a totally unique, totally different game, but it is World War II. And it even takes into account the morale of the country. So as you suffer defeats from carelessly throwing your troops into battle and getting them killed, your country goes back, news gets back to your population, and that might start revolts and all this sort of thing. So when you losing big battles actually has a big effect on the morale of your country in this game. So it's a really interesting take on it. So it's a very interesting game. So for anyone who really likes World War II and that kind of grand strategy game, it's not a horribly complex game, but it's certainly not Monopoly. but definitely worth playing. There's some definite strategy there. A lot of it is about resource allocation and supplies, and if you're going to put troops in the field somewhere, you got to be able to supply them and that kind of thing too. So, anyways, interesting game. It's a little bit more, probably a little more complex than Axis and Allies, but it really takes into account a lot of interesting stuff. So, definitely a game worth playing.
Yeah, I don't know Larry Harris, the designer, but I've done a little bit of reading about this game, and I've talked with some other people that have seen some interviews with him and stuff. Apparently, he considers this his magnum opus. Mm-hmm. He wanted to do all the stuff that he couldn't do in Axis and Allies because they've got very tight margins in what they're trying to do at Hasbro. And the interesting thing is, a lot of like hardcore war game grognards sort of look at things like Axis and Allies and Hasbro and go, oh, that's just kiddie stuff. Those guys aren't really very good. They're actually fantastic game designers. Mm-hmm. They are really fantastic game designers in that they know what they're trying to achieve. They've got objectives, and they march forward with those objectives in mind. They are designing to an objective. And the thing is, like, if GMT sold 100,000 copies of a game, they would canonize the designer, right? That doesn't happen, right? There's only a handful of traditional board war games that have sold that many copies. If Hasbro sells 100,000 copies of the game, the designer's called in on the carpet on like, what did you guys do wrong, right? It's actually that it goes through a lot of review process. So I'm sure that a lot of people get called on the carpet, right? Because that's a failure for them. 100,000 copies is a failure. So considering how many units they're moving, you can't really denigrate them for their product. And they know what their niche is. They a lot of those guys play other stuff. And I know this because a friend of mine, a guy I used to work with at the War College, like lives down the street from one of the VPs at Hasbro. So the Naval War College is actually surprisingly plugged in with Hasbro, which is a Rhode Island company, Rhode Island or Massachusetts, or somebody. They're near close enough that somebody lives near the Naval War College who works at Hasbro, right? They're not very far away. And so I always found it really interesting having these conversations with them about how Hasbro approaches problems and stuff. It's very fascinating. So what was the other game thing that you were doing, Pat?
So earlier today, a friend of mine, or a couple friends of mine, and I were play testing or playing a game called Starfleet Tactical, and we've built a module on Tabletop Simulator. That's where the name of this show comes from. It was a Axanar D6 against two little Federation frigates. Let's see here. I got it right here. For those of you shipped to the Starfleet book, I was taken on two. There we go. On page, they don't have page numbers. Wow. Okay.
Oh, I had forgotten that they don't have page numbers. You're right.
Yeah. There we go. The old Syria class frigate right there. So had an interesting little battle. We're just trying to test the play balance of the system with smaller ships against a larger ship. And so far, it's been pretty interesting. It's not over yet. I'm flying the D6, and two of my good friends are each flying a frigate. We flew in, made a first pass, did a little damage to one, got away from. And if you remember what was that? In Nemesis, at some point they were fighting. The Romulans are helping them out and stuff, and the Enterprise takes a bunch of hits to the front shield, and Riker says, face the front shield someplace else. So basically the Enterprise does this big loop around, and in that time, Scimitar turns in on the two Romulan ships and knocks them out of the battle while Enterprise is doing its loop so it doesn't get shot in its down shield. So at some point, I hit one of them, he turns off. That got them split up. Then I was able to come back around on the other one, damage him. I got lucky and knocked out a bunch of weapons. And then in the meantime, the other guy got his ship kind of repaired and stuff and came after me, but he was tailing me the whole time. And In the meanwhile, I looped back around, got my damaged shields back up and firmed up again, came around, destroyed the damage, or wrecked. He's a derelict now, the damaged ship, and then the guy who's been chasing me, he finally cut in and got in a pretty good shot. Did a little bit of damage. Lost my aft photon torpedoes were knocked out, and my starboard shield got knocked down. Took a little bit of damage. So that's the predicament I'm in now. Is that I've knocked one of the ships out. The other guy's behind me on a down shield. So we'll see how it goes. We'll finish it off probably next week. So I was doing a high-speed pass on the damaged guy, and he hit the brakes and did a really hard turn so he could face me, get some weapons on me. He did a little damage to my shields. I fired everything at him, and he's pretty much been knocked out. I flew by, but I started to hit the brakes so I could make a tight turn because the Federation ship that's coming in behind me, he's coming in real fast. I decided to slow down, make a tight turn. I took a hit on my starboard shield, and so we'll see. I'll probably come back around because I don't want to keep exposing my down starboard shield. If I keep turning right, that'll be bad. So we'll see how it goes. I'll let you know next week or the week after.
Sounds like it sounds like a lot of fun.
So, but for anyone who's not familiar with Tabletop Simulator in the land of COVID-19, where you can't get together, if you haven't tried Tabletop Simulator, you can go on Steam and pick it up. Lots of board games are available on Steam or on Tabletop Simulator. I think some you actually have to pay a few bucks for. There's lots of other games out there that are real popular. And once you learn how to use the mechanics of the Tabletop Simulator modules, you can actually build your own modules in it, and if you have a game that you like. So that's what we did. We couldn't get together, so we built a module and have been playing the game. It's been a lot of fun.
The really cool thing about Tabletop Simulator is that it literally is a tabletop simulator. You see the table, you see the stuff on it, you see the dice on it. The really cool thing is it really is a simulation of a tabletop. The thing I really dislike about it is that it's a simulation of a tabletop, which means, like, where did the dice go? I mean, you have to sort of scroll all over looking for the dice. And then you get So,
but the other thing is, if you can find one die, you can then clone that one and have a whole pile of dice right where you just were. So,
which is good.
There's lots of YouTube videos on how it works. So there's lots of info out there to help you out and get you through the beginning stages of it.
Yeah, and one of the things that's great about it, because it is a simulation of a tabletop, and it took a while for this to really sort of permeate through my thick skull to understand why this was such a good thing, is that the user interface is pretty standard, and you don't really have to. I mean, if you've played the game in person, you know how to play it in Tabletop Simulator. There's just a couple of little things you need to work out on how to grab the dice, how to grab an object and move it. But by and large, it's the exact same experience. Whereas with a lot of computer games, you kind of go, yeah, okay, I see the lineage, etc., but I want to do the thing, and I don't know how to do the thing that I would know how to do on the table. Well, in this, I want to use the dice, I grab the dice. So it works pretty well.
Yep.
The other game-related thing that we were talking about was something I was talking about. I was waxing poetic about the idea of using Legos in a design a ship game like Eclipse. I don't know if any of you have played Eclipse, but if you've played Eclipse, it has the feature that you get to design ships, but when you upgrade a ship, it immediately upgrades all the ships that you've built.
And just for a little background, Eclipse is one of those. You start with the planet, go out, explore, conquer, that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and so Eclipse is I think it's a nice little game, but I think it suffers a little bit from the fact that some of the ship design stuff doesn't quite work as far as I'm concerned. But it occurs to me, grab a bunch of Legos, like you've got basically about 6 different colors of blocks. of little blocks that you can put on top of the big blocks to represent systems. And then you can just, it just seems to naturally flow that, like, I've got a destroyer. It's a little 2x2 block. And that means I can put 4 1-block systems or 2 2-block systems or a 2 and 2 1s. And if it doesn't fit on the block, it doesn't fit on your ship. So I'm going to do some poking around with that. I have many, many Legos that I bought a long time ago when I first started having this idea. But I was thinking more in terms, at that point, I was thinking more in terms of cargo for game. There's a game called Serenissima where you're moving cargo around, you're Venetian traders moving cargo around on sail or oar-powered galleys in the Mediterranean. But one of the problem with the little ships, you can have crew or you can have the goods that are being moved around. One of the problem with the little ship things is that they're narrower at the base than they are at the top. So if you bump the board, all your ships keel over, dump all their contents, and then right themselves. And so every time I've played that game, there's always been some instance where somebody bumps the board and dumps all the ships, and you put all the stuff back on the ships. Wouldn't it be easier if you just had Lego, so they don't fall off? So that's actually why I originally bought those a long, long time ago. So, but so that's it for that. I could go into my soliloquy about why the D12 is the absolute best die design ever, but I'll save that for another time. But War Room has D12s in it, so that's a +2 to hit as far as I'm concerned. So let's see. We've spent last week talking about last couple of weeks talking about Captain Kirk and his various battles. Pat, I think you said something to me about wanting to sort of do a summary, sort of talking about what makes Kirk a good commander, what makes him a good leader, right?
Yeah. So over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about the different battles that they had during the 5-year mission. Chandler pointed out to me, a friend of mine pointed out to me that actually I should look at the cartoon. There was one with the stasis field generator in there, which was simulated in one of the Starship Combat games that we used to play a long time ago too. So I might take a look at that and see what else I can find from the cartoon series. But anyways, so we've been talking about the different instances of space battles during the old series. We haven't gotten to the movies yet. Haven't had. I'll want to sit down and rewatch a couple of those bits, and I haven't had a chance to do that. But I still thought it would be fun to just kind of focus in on Kirk and maybe some of the leadership stuff and some of the tactics, a lot of his go-to tactics, and then just kind of wrap it up with that. And we can obviously at some point we can talk in detail about Wrath of Khan and the Undiscovered Country and stuff like that too. So some of this wrap up will incorporate some of the things from those shows, but we'll
and we're planning on doing a 5-part series on Star Trek V.
That's right. 6, wasn't it? So it was actually kind of funny. I read just Star Trek novel. It was it was the autobiography of Captain Kirk, but in there at one point they mention walking around. He mentions walking around and seeing a movie theater or something where the marquee was actually a movie about the adventures of the Enterprise, and it was called The Final Frontier, where all those events from that movie happened, but it didn't actually, so that was just a poor Hollywood
retcon.
That was a Hollywood movie that didn't actually happen. So I thought that was pretty humorous in there. But anyway, it's kind of a fun book if you're interested.
I think it's humorous that in the 23rd century that they have movie theaters.
Yeah, well, I think the point was whatever their equivalent is. So, but anyways, so as far as Kirk goes, so there's just a few sort of, we're just going to talk about it. I don't have a big put together any sort of big presentation for this. We're just going to talk about the various topics, and then we'll talk about about Kirk and kind of relate some of those things to modern military tactics and strategy and stuff like that.
All right.
So the first thing with Kirk is we'll just talk about sort of his leadership and his preparation and stuff, because they hint and allude to the fact that he studied really hard at school and everything, or at Starfleet Academy. And so the point is that he was well prepared. He's always done everything he can do to prepare himself. Hard work and all that studying that he did, the ones that they described him as a pile of books with legs, I believe. So, but that clearly paid off. That preparation clearly paid off and gave him a baseline of knowledge on a lot of different things. And if you can bring in little bits of knowledge from a bunch of different topics, that might let you look at a problem in a different way. And so he's obviously very resourceful. And so his time at Starfleet Academy prepared him pretty well, and he didn't waste it. And again, there are historical examples of some of those generals that we hear about. They were the guys that stayed in their dorm and studied and read while everybody else was out goofing around and having fun on the weekends. So that pays off. But I like that theme, and I think that's a better lesson than, oh yeah, you should expect to just be a natural genius at everything you do, and everything you touch turns to gold, like so many of the movies do, or even unfortunately the JJ films kind of treat Kirk as this natural born genius. Even a genius has to work. They can just as easily end up living in mom and dad's basement if they don't use their talents and such to learn and to get better at stuff. So, as far as Kirk's command style goes, one of the things I've noticed is that Kirk takes ownership of the mission. For instance, when he was told, in Errand of Mercy, when they were told to go there, and that they found out that there's now war between the Federation and the Klingons, he didn't sit here and agonize over it. He typically, like you said, Chris, he deals with the situation at hand. He doesn't sit around moping like, oh my God, we're at war. What are we going to do? At least he might have some doubts in his quarters by himself. And maybe when he's talking to Bones or Spock, but he's not going to do that on the bridge of the Enterprise. But he takes ownership of the mission. Whatever the mission is what he's going to do, and he's going to do everything he can to accomplish that mission. And he's very resourceful in the ways he goes about that. And we'll get into some more of that. But the other thing is when Kirk's in command, he is in charge. That is his ship. He doesn't allow anybody else to come over and start, giving orders, or he doesn't compromise on who's in charge of his ship. So I like that. One of the other things is that part of this being resourceful is that Kirk never gives up. And examples of that are just about every episode and movie of Star Trek ever. At no point does he ever give up. The only, you keep working, you keep fighting, you keep trying until the very end. So, and that's good. And like Chris, I believe you were saying, he's decisive without being impulsive. Go ahead. You probably expand on that a little bit, I suppose.
Yeah, so Pat's referring to that conversation we had 30 to 120 minutes before it started. I made the comment that Kirk doesn't agonize over what the plan is going to be, right? He's got, he's pretty decisive about what he wants to do, but when the situation changes in one way, shape, or form, he will flex according to the situation. And it's not that he's moving willy-nilly, but he takes advantage of opportunities. When something isn't working, he will say, okay, that isn't working, and moves on to something else. So we see that a lot of times when Pat's going to talk, I guess, about how he plays dead, because he's really good at playing dead.
Oh, that's funny. And I forgot about it.
In fact, he even did it in one of the movies, right? He died in that weird wave, and then he came back later. So, anyway, that bad joke. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, actually, William Shatner played the possum in the movie Over the Hedge. I don't know if it's a kids movie and stuff. There was a movie about 10 years ago called Over the Hedge. Go watch it. He was the voice of the possum who was always playing dead throughout the movie. So I just thought that was hilarious. Sorry.
That's fantastic. Okay. I love that.
All right, rabbit hole done.
Yeah, rabbit hole done. So in any event, he's always, in the Balance of Terror where they take the hit, he goes, all right, we're going to play dead for a while, and try to resolve the situation that way. Lure them in, get them to make a mistake. But when Spock accidentally, at one point, when he accidentally hits the control and powers up the ship, Kirk, okay, the situation's changed. So now how can I use this changed situation to my advantage? And sort of go ahead.
Yeah, and I thought what was interesting is the rest of the bridge crew's looking at Spock like, oh, you just screwed us all. Thanks very much. Kirk's like, okay, it happened. There's no point in whining about it at this point. How can I use it to my advantage? So I like that.
And I know them. So when I worked at the Center for Naval Analysis, which incidentally does not represent my views do not represent the Center for Naval Analysis, blah, 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 blah. But in any event, when I worked there, I used to go to sea all the time. And one of my colleagues who worked there had been a rep on the scientific analyst on a battle group. There's, when an aircraft carrier goes to sea with its staff on board, there is usually a CNA person on board as the scientific analyst. So if you ever saw the movie Final Countdown, where CNA sort of claims the what's his name? The guy who he later played the president in the West Wing.
Martin Sheen.
Martin Sheen's character in there was a scientific analyst assigned to this aircraft carrier. So where did they get that idea? They got that idea from CNN. And so in any event, the one guy I know, I was talking with him, and I said, what's it like working for your admiral? And he said, it was really great because everybody loves him, because whenever something bad happens, everybody's used to the idea of like, oh shit, I got to tell the boss I screwed up. And then usually the boss is not in a good mood about screwing up and there's yelling. And apparently this admiral, he just go, a year from now, nobody will care. Do what you need to do to fix it. And it was great because he just sort of said, it happened, let's move on. Right?
Yeah. Ideally, you can learn something from it and move on, as long as nobody died and you didn't tear up an airplane or something like that.
Yeah.
But some things are just the price of doing business too.
Yeah. So Kirk does a great job of sort of flexing to the situation. He processes information fast and reacts accordingly. This actually led to, Pat and I had a little conversation about what do we think doctrine looks like in Starfleet, because doctrine is basically the software, the sort of organizational software that military force uses. And, not just military forces, just that the military calls it doctrine. So it's part of the culture. It's part of how you approach problems. Like in World War II, U.S. Army doctrine was, oh, there's a problem over there. Let's drop some bombs on it from an airplane. And so, we're not going to throw guys at it if we can avoid it. We're just going to drop bombs from an airplane. And so our doctrine said, we're going to invest in the resources necessary to drop bombs from airplanes and deal with problems that way. And so doctrine is sort of the operating system that a military works with, and sort of the individual tactics that are associated with various platforms and weapons, et cetera, you can sort of think of as being the applications that are running under that. Right? If there's a mismatch, it doesn't work, right? Like if you've got a doctrine that says we're going to concentrate on long-range fires, and then you build all short-range weapons, then yeah, you've got a mismatch. And it's interesting when you have mismatches. it's always interesting watching when doctrine is changing and they're trying to fix problems because they've got a mismatch, etc. So thinking about how Kirk approaches these problems, it's almost like he's got a set of tactics, techniques, and procedures in his head. He's thinking about what we call pre-planned responses. And I can't figure out how much of this is actually that he's got the book memorized and he's using responses from the book, and half of it is just, he's a really sharp guy who studied and reacts fast. I'll note that there's not as big a difference between those two things as you might think, because if he's a really sharp guy and he's learned everything, right, part of what he was probably studying at Starfleet Academy was the book I'm referring to, right? But we don't have a whole lot of data points for no shit Federation starship captains in this time period. We don't see a whole bunch of other ones. We don't know how they react. So we think Kirk is above average, but the question is how far above average, and what's the standard deviation, right? So, in any event, back.
Yeah, no, and one of the things I like when in Balance of Terror, when Spock hit the button by accident and sent off a signal, Kirk immediately thought, given the information I just sent out into the universe, or the Enterprise, the signal that went out, how's the other guy going to react to that? He immediately thought about his opponent and how that opponent was going to react, and then he came up with a plan to deal with the anticipated Romulan response. So and that worked out, and it served him. So the key is he was always fighting. He was always trying to get in the head of his opponent, not necessarily worrying too much. He accounted for the apparent capabilities of the ships, but also what the commander would do with it. So it worked. Obviously it worked pretty well. Right. So we've talked about Starship. We're going to deviate just briefly on landing parties for a second, just because this kind of goes to Kirk's attitude about many things and stuff. First, the fact that Kirk always beamed down to the planet, probably one of the reasons for the Next Generation stipulation that the captain needs to stay aboard the ship, because there were a few instances where Kirk wasn't on board. When a crisis or something like that happened that could affect the ship. Errand of Mercy was one of them. Friday's Child was one of them, where there was a Klingon vessel out there floating around, and Kirk was down on the planet dealing with the stuff on the ground. So it's possible your first officer could do that kind of thing. So, anyways. One of the other things is one of Kirk's priorities is he always put the safety of the ship first, even above the lives of the landing party, especially if Kirk himself was on the landing party. So he always made sure that the ship took care of itself. He would fend for himself down on the planet as long as he needed to, as long as the Enterprise was safe and doing what it needed to do. A couple examples are, of course, Errand of Mercy. Klingon fleet shows up. Enterprise is told, he had given Sulu orders to leave. And in the arena, he told Sulu, keep those shields up, do what you need to do to protect the Enterprise, include leave. If you need to leave us behind, so be it. So, and then, so the point is that Kirk always put the Enterprise first, and they made a lot of there's quite a few times where they talk about how much Kirk just loves the Enterprise. It's his primary thing. So so back to Starship combat. One of Kirk's superpowers also seems to be the fact that he is really good at dealing with cloaked vessels. We see this in several examples throughout. Just because he doesn't have a good solid target lock on the cloaked ship doesn't stop him from trying to figure out where it's going to go and what it's going to do. And now, clearly, that's not just Kirk intuitively guessing things. That means he's got to be training his people to deal with an opponent that maybe isn't is hard to see or hard to hit or something. So in my opinion, he clearly has to be doing battle drills and simulations with his crew, during in between episodes, let's say. Of course, there's Balance of Terror. There's Balance of Terror where we see him doing that. Then there's Star Trek 3. He kind of looks at the screen and goes, "Huh, that's an interesting little thing. Maybe that's a cloak chip." And he and Sulu agree it's a cloak chip, and they shoot at it. And then Star Trek 6, obviously, it's Uhura's idea, right? So it becomes a group project between Uhura, McCoy, Spock, and Kirk's just fighting the ship, trying to keep the ship alive while they're modifying their torpedo to go find the Chang's bird of prey. Yes, Chris.
So it's been a while since I watched Star Trek 3. Did they really look out through the main viewer and see
Yeah, pretty much. They saw this little distortion with the stars. So maybe that was a bug of that particular model of bird of prey or something.
Pat knows exactly how much I hate the entire idea that they use that main viewer as a damn window. I mean, it makes as much sense as a window on a submarine. It's dark. You can't see shit, right? And even if you could see shit, you're moving really fast, and everything that you're going to see is going to be really far away, or it's going to be like by you.
Yep.
It's not like flying a fighter. And so...
And even if you're flying a jet airplane, another airplane's just a speck at several miles away.
Yeah, and when you go to sea, none of the people that are actually fighting the ship are looking out a window. They're all looking at a computer screen. Some of them might be looking at a map. Some of them might be looking at a map on a computer screen.
What I liked is in the Kobayashi. Yeah, what I liked is in the Kobayashi Maru test, it was kind of a tactical display. Or in Star Trek 2, they showed Regular One, and Enterprise was on one side, Reliance was on the other, and you see the tactical display there. That's useful information. The Starfield, not so much, but it's TV.
Yeah, that Regular One thing also sort of drives me nuts because, maybe. I mean, they're not dealing with a Starfleet crew. Maybe if you've got a Starfleet crew and you know that a standard orbit means something, and as a result, you can sort of predict that if they're in a standard orbit, that means that they won't be able to, if I can't see them, they must be moving, they're in such and such an orbit, and I can do what I need to do.
Yeah.
But, this is one of the reasons why hiding behind something in space is really hard, because you can't see the other guy either, so you don't know when you need to zig and when you need to zag in order to stay in the sensor shadow, because he's in your sensor shadow too. And so if you ever get a look at him, he gets a look at you.
Yeah, well, that's one of Murphy's laws of armed combat. Yeah, that's one of Murphy's laws of armed combat, right? That whole list is pretty hilarious, but it says if you can see the enemy, he can see you.
You're in range, he's in range. Or if he's in range, you're in range.
If he's in range, you're in range, yeah. Incoming photon torpedoes have the right of way. So.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things like that just sort of drive me nuts. The window in particular. Because there's all sorts of tactical information that I could put up there that would just be so much. Like if you ever played, remember that one arcade game, that Star Trek arcade game, that when it started the scenario, it would say, "Welcome aboard, Captain." Zoom, zoom, zoom. You know the one I'm talking about?
I think I remember that. Yeah, I think I remember playing that game when I was a kid, throwing quarters into video games.
So I remember that game. It had this big screen here, and then at the very top, it had an overhead plan view that showed you everything.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got this big screen that's your viewer screen that's looking out the window. Everybody I know is looking at the little screen up here because it's the one that actually gives you some useful information.
Yep. It's called The phrase there is situational awareness.
Exactly. Situational awareness. The key to combat is situational awareness.
And an awful lot of other things.
Yeah, most of the guys who got shot down in World War II didn't know they were in a battle until the bullets started hitting their airplane.
Yeah. Actually, you see in I'll diverge here briefly. In Star Wars, when they're attacking the Death Star, you always notice that right before an X-Wing pilot dies, he's looking around frantically. He's like lost his situational awareness, doesn't know what's going on for a split second, and that's when he dies. So that's been my take on a lot of that. They all look confused right before they die. So
yeah, there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. All right. So one of the other things is Kirk's use of deception. All right. This is a very important thing. Using the deception, in all the movies, right? Name whatever action flick you want. The heroes always have to create a diversion to get the bad guys looking over here while they come over here and accomplish their mission, do whatever they have to do. But that's pretty much a standard thing you want to put in, because you need to, you've got to create some doubt in your opponent as to, hey, what's the main attack? Is it over here or is it over here? And, which one's a diversion, which one's the real objective? Just like in World War II, we invented a fake army and created a bunch of radio chatter to make the Germans think, yep, the landing's going to be in the Pas de Calais, not on the Normandy beaches and stuff. And we did that stuff. If nothing else, it gives your opponent an opportunity to guess wrong. And if you can make him guess, if you give him multiple decision points that one could be a wrong decision, that's only going to help you out. So.
And there's another interesting thing in this, and that is, you have to have some idea of what your opponent is capable of seeing. If you want to put a false picture in his head, you need to know that he can see the false picture. Yeah. And so this is one of the problems you can actually run into against an opponent that doesn't have a whole lot of sensor capability, doesn't have a whole lot of information uptake, is that basically like you can't do, there's no such thing as doing sleight of hand tricks in front of a blind guy. Right? What's the point? Right? And so, did they not react because they weren't fooled or because they didn't see it? Mm-hmm. So now in the Star Trek universe, of course, everybody's got these fantastic sensors. It's like, everybody's got the, Bones pulls out a tricorder and says, "Oh, you had McDonald's again today. I can tell," right? And so, the ships have the equivalent capability. They can see everything, right? So this is really kind of a universe where you can kind of make the assumption that if you do something in the view of the other guy, he's going to be able to see it. But, part and parcel of that is, can he see through it? Because, there's, if you can read what the other guy's energy levels are, you've got an idea of what he's doing. So how do you hide that?
Yeah. And, they obviously, part of the deceptions that they use. So we do have what makes a good captain? I'm writing a new Star Trek character. I want to know what makes a good captain. Well, I'd say a big part of that is taking good care of the people that work for you, training them, and to be both technically proficient and capable. I mean, it's just kind of basic leadership, and have the trust of the people that work for you. So, one, you got to be kind of an expert, or have some level of expertise in what you're doing, but you also have to have the trust of the people that work for you. I mean, that's a real basic, leadership type thing. And it sounds easy, but it's always challenging. So let's see here. So we'll go back to the deception part again real quick. So Kirk obviously used deception. So part of that is bluffing. Part of that is coming from a point of trying to come at problems from a position of strength that's kind of negotiation and stuff too. Just like in Star Trek 3, Kirk will try to bluff. It doesn't always work. In Star Trek 3, he tries to bluff Commander Krug on the, after the Enterprise gets disabled. And, Kirk's basically like, hey, what's the meaning of this? I'm gonna blow you up here in just a few minutes. You need to get out of here or surrender or something. Tries to get Kirk to surrender. And Krug's gut said, nah, I don't think so. I think I'm better off. He's blustering too much. So, so like I said, it doesn't always work, but he gives it a try because, hey, if you bluff somebody, then, you might win with that fairly low risk. So
it's also important to point out that just because something didn't work doesn't mean it was the wrong answer.
Correct.
Because you got a hand of cards and you got to play the hand you've got, and sometimes you just don't have the cards.
Exactly.
Sometimes you just don't have the cards.
And that's one of the other things is so Kirk makes a distinction between playing chess or poker, right? And so that I always thought that was an interesting distinction. So it was always one of the jokes I always like to make is you always need to know what game you're playing. Are you playing poker, chess, or chicken? And and Kirk does that very well. Let's see here. So yes, he would play dead. We talked about that. Act wounded. So deception ultimately, and Sun Tzu had the saying, when you're strong, you need to essentially act weak, and that might lure your opponent into attack you. And then when you're weak, maybe act strong so that your opponent might back off of you for a little bit, and that would be kind of the bluffing and deception part of things. So,
which is almost a direct quote from Sun Tzu.
Almost a direct. Well, that's who I attributed it to. I don't know. Yeah, that's Sun Tzu.
Okay, I missed the part where you said that. I'm sorry.
Okay, got you. And speaking of chess, Kirk thinks three-dimensionally. Starship combat, it's a three-dimensional thing, right? The other thing is he can beat Spock in three-dimensional chess, right? So, and Spock's not exactly a dummy, but Kirk's pretty clever. So he beats Spock in three-dimensional chess, which if you've ever tried three-dimensional chess, it's a lot of fun. It kind of blows your mind a little bit. So it's worth trying. Now, so we're getting close to the very end here. So I'll just kind of a couple tongue-in-cheek things about Kirk here at this point. One thing is if you talk to Kirk, you're dead. Okay?
Yeah.
You just gave him the opening he needs. If you bother to talk to Kirk and you need to gloat, you're done. And actually, it doesn't matter if you're a genetically engineered Superman or if you're a supercomputer. If you talk to Kirk and you let Kirk talk to you, you're doomed. It's over. So we got Landru and we got M5 are two of the big computers that Kirk talked into circles, and they essentially shut down or self-destructed. The gangsters. Oh yeah, what was it? Piece of the action. They tried to follow Kirk's explanation of Fizbin, and he just talked them in circles. The Khan gave Kirk a minute. That was a whole minute. Kirk's like, oh, I already know this enemy. He's going to be overconfident and everything. I've got a minute. We can figure this out. And Kirk figured and bet that he knew something about the way starships work that Khan didn't know, because Kirk's been doing this all his life. And another one was Commander Krug in Star Trek 3 gave Kirk a minute for him and his valiant crew. Wow. Kirk planned to formed a plan, went down, self-destructed the Enterprise, blew up the landing part, the boarding party. I always kind of wondered why he didn't beam over to the Klingon ship, but maybe there were technical reasons why that didn't work. Since clearly Kirk didn't come up with that as the plan, that must not have been a good plan somehow.
So let me interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
For the record, this cat has been asleep for an hour. hour and a half, and then now he's decided it's the time to climb all over me. And every time he starts pawing at my face, his claws are out.
Nice.
Because he knows that he can get my attention with the claws out. And I need to trim them, don't I, buddy? Don't I? Yeah.
So the other thing is they make a lot of noise. I don't know. They talk a lot about how much Kirk loves the Enterprise, and he does. He loves the ship. It's clearly a hit, and the crew, of course, is the most important thing. Commanding a starship, as Spock says, is his first best destiny. Mistake to accept promotion, all that stuff. However, if you end up in command of the Enterprise, commanding the Enterprise is really, really dangerous unless you're Kirk. So let's just go through the list here. So imagine you're not on the bridge. You don't know all the details of what happened necessarily. But Captain Christopher Pike was commander of the Enterprise, turns over to Kirk, and just a little while later, he has this horrible accident. So he doesn't die, but pretty close. But really terrible accident, right? You don't want to be in that chair where you can only say one beep or two beeps. Then Kirk is obviously in command of the Enterprise, and during the Doomsday Machine, Commodore Decker takes command of the Enterprise. Kirk didn't really approve, so imagine if you were somebody else. Suddenly, Commodore Decker is dead. Just didn't survive the mission. The official story is that he sacrificed himself into that with the shuttle and suicide. Made the suicide run into the Doomsday Machine. That's the official story. Next, now there was one Commodore who did take command of the Enterprise in the Deadly Years, and he happened to survive. So he's the only lucky one in this group. Maybe Kirk just figured he was too dumb to be a threat or something like that. So, because he just didn't know what he did, and he turned over command to the Enterprise immediately as soon as Kirk stood onto the bridge. So, next, Kirk finishes the 5-year mission, and command goes to Will Decker, Commodore Decker's son. Well, he doesn't survive the V'ger mission either. Suddenly, he's gone. Kirk took command of the Enterprise from him, and then he mysteriously vanishes. He's gone. So, and then finally, I believe they go on another 5-year mission, and then Kirk goes back to being an admiral. Spock is in command of the Enterprise, and then as soon as they go in, as soon as the Khan incident or the Genesis incident happens, Spock mysteriously dies also. So the survival rate, unless you're Captain Kirk, for captains of the Starship Enterprise of that particular vessel, not so good. So just something to think about. There could be a conspiracy there. Some people need to dig deeper, I think. So, and that's all I got on Captain Kirk for right now.
That would make a great thread in Lower Decks.
I think you're right. I think Lower Decks should address that issue, that very issue right there.
Has Lower Decks done anything with red shirts?
No, I don't think they talked about red shirts specifically.
It's got to be on the list.
Being endangered. Yeah, I know John Scalzi.
John Scalzi.
Yeah, John Scalzi. He wrote Red Shirts, which is a fantastic, fun book. It's kind of a spoof of the whole thing.
I love that novel.
But it is great. Yeah, anything humorous he does, I really enjoy. Actually, just about anything he writes, I really enjoy. So for anybody,
his collection of essays, Your Hate Mail Will Be Graded, is pretty good.
Yeah, he's got a book of short stories as well, which is really good. But there is actually on Netflix, I believe it's called Love and Robots. And some of them are shorts, some of the little cartoon shorts that they do. They do these 20-minute, 30-minute cartoon episodes. And they're just little science fiction stories, which are pretty good, but a couple of them at least are John Scalzi's. They're all really fun. I think he did the one where the cats take over the Earth.
And I think there's one of the ones in that series, which I haven't seen, is a Marco Close novel or story.
Oh, yeah? Okay. I'm not familiar with him.
So Marco is I told you the story about going to the science fiction convention and my coworkers going to the science fiction convention.
Oh yeah.
Have I told that on the show?
I'm not sure. I know we are at 10 o'clock, however.
I'll tell it quickly. So,
all right.
I work with an Army former Army helicopter pilot who had become an intel officer, and he had a lot of use or lose leave. And I had previously recommended Marco Close's Frontline series to him, which is a great series. I think book 7 just came out and comes out in audiobook in February, so I'm holding off rereading them all until the new one comes out in audiobook in February. But I said, hey, if you're interested, there's a science fiction convention. Marco's going to be one of the guests of honor. It's a very short or a very small con, so you could probably go and spend 2 hours talking to him if you wanted to. And so I go away on a business trip, and by the time I come back, it's gone from me telling the guy in the cubicle next to me about a science fiction convention that he can burn some leave on. Just him, he can go down to North Carolina, where he's from anyway, and go to the science fiction convention. And it turns into a bunch of people in the office are going to go and woohoo, we're going to Comic-Con. Comic-Con, 80,000 people, HonorCon, 300 people, scale appropriate. But in any event, that Frontline series, one of the units in the Frontline series, he did a comic book on and stuff like that, and they took one of those stories and turned it into something for that series. There's a YouTube podcast interview with Marco Cluse done by the Templin Institute. Like an hour-long interview, and he talks about the process of how weird it is to have one of your things turned into something on Netflix and all the rest of it. So it's worth looking up. Marco's a really good guy. He was he's from Germany originally. He now lives in like New Hampshire. And when he was in Germany, he was in the Army. And so there's little Easter eggs, like the amount at one point. They need to get fuel for this particular shuttle because they need to evacuate off the planet. Things are going to hell, and they need to get away. And so they're talking to the locals, and how much fuel do you need? And they said, well, the maximum capacity is blah 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 blah, and that number is exactly the fuel load of a CH-54 helicopter.
Oh yeah, right.
So there's lots of little things there. When he gives numbers, those numbers are from. If you're like an Army guy, you might go, oh, yeah, I know what that number is. So I think we're done because we're at the hour mark, aren't we?
Yes, we are at the hour mark.
So Philip Banks says, I'm thinking of something that isn't part of Frontlines. He actually had 2 of them done. And so the other one is a Lucky 13. I can't remember what that other group is. So one of them was definitely a Frontlines thing. They might have filed the serial numbers off of it and turned it into a non-Frontlines thing, but there was one that is a Frontlines thing. If I remember this correctly, I'm almost positive that there were two of them that they did for it. But I could be wrong on that. I really could be. So I think that's it for the week. So what are we going to do next week, Pat? We should decide.
Next week, next week is
the day after Christmas.
It's the day after Christmas. So yeah, I'll have family here. I'm sorry. My son who lives in town and my daughter might fly in. So we'll see. I don't know. You and I are we'll have to put our heads together and figure out what we're going to talk about next week, I think. So, because this wraps up. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm definitely available. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, I believe I am home that weekend anyway. So it should be good. Should be able to come up with something.
We'll come up with something. All right, then. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Alec.
Hey guys,
Welcome to the show.
good show.
To your show, welcome.
Hey, listen, I just want to tell everyone a couple things. One, so you guys will be back next Saturday, the day after Christmas, right? Not a problem.
Yeah, I think so. Yep, I don't think there'll be.
I will definitely be here.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Unless I end up flying for some reason unexpectedly, but yeah, I should be here.
All right, because we won't be having Axanar Confidential on Friday night, but we will have Starfleet Tactical. So that's it. There's also, for everyone out there, we've got two things going on. One, we're about to launch in the morning the Axanar Christmas giveaway, which is for fans in need. Any fan in need who's struggling. If you're just struggling with the holiday season financially, COVID's been tough. Some people have lost their jobs. So we're giving out gift boxes. And you just pay the shipping for it, and we're sending fans, and it may be someone where you say, look, I'm struggling, I need some Christmas gifts to give my kids. We'll send them to you, and it's just $9.95 per box. You can order multiples if you want to send them to a friend, or a friend who's in need. You can just communicate with us. The idea is we're going to just give away free stuff to people in need. And we want everyone in Axanar to take part. The other thing is we just came up with, while you guys were talking, we have a little Christmas miracle fundraiser we're going to be doing for a lady she's 47. She's got 6 dogs, lives in a trailer, lost her job due to COVID, and she's struggling big time. So we're going to take that on as our Christmas charity. We're going to launch a GoFundMe on Monday, so everyone pay attention. We'll be doing some live feeds during the week where we'll be giving stuff away and raising money for this charity. So it's a lady in Texas, Christy Sellers, one of our big 3 red dog rescues we work with, has been just crying her eyes out, trying to help this lady, and we said, hey, we can help. So we're going to help pay her. She's about to be evicted. We're going to pay off her rent, and we're going to pay off her electric bill, which her electricity got turned off. I mean, you look at us. We all live in homes with roofs over our heads, and here's a lady who lives in a trailer with 6 dogs and lost her job. And I think that's the type of thing that we at Axanar believe that we need to help with. Yep. So everyone stay tuned for more info of that. But hey, listen, if we don't talk before then, Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah for those of you of the Jewish persuasion. Happy Kwanzaa, and then Merry Festivus for the rest of us.
Festivus for the rest of us.
That's right.
I used to have a Festivus pole at my last job. So it was a Festivus pole that I made out of stuff, right? So it was just stuff I had around the house, and I sort of hacked it together. But it was a stainless steel Festivus pole. And, an Orthodox Festivus pole is a sturdy aluminum pole. And so what I always say, you know why we have a stainless steel instead of an aluminum pole? And people would say, no, why? And I'd say, because we're Reformed.
Oh, I thought it was so it could double as a stripper pole for the Christmas party.
No, it wasn't. It didn't have nearly. Yeah, it was basically
not that kind of tensile strength.
No, it was like a leftover lamp, one of those cheap Torchiere lamps was the core.
Oh, yeah.
And then there were it was one of the rest of it was made out of one of those cheap $20 coat racks where it's plastic and metal with metal poles that you just sort of hammer together. And so it was 2 metal poles from that with newspaper stuffed down to hold it in place. And so it was really hacked together. But I did have this little part at the top that was an extending thing that came out that I didn't use for the first 3 years. But then for the 4th year, I decided I needed to deploy the War Reserve mode. And so I was able to pull that up and make it a foot taller. And this all started when the office I worked in had this crazy Christmas decorating tradition. They really went all out for it. And the judge the one year, who was an Army lieutenant colonel, Green Beret, he let it be known that a Festivus pole would be looked upon with great favor. And so got a Festivus poll in my Division 1.
You brown nose, you. All right, that's it for now, guys. We will see everyone next Saturday here on Starfleet Tactical. Thank you, Pat and Chris, as always, for doing an amazing job. And everyone else, we'll see you this week. Stay tuned for more, and make sure you subscribe to the Aries Studios channel so you can get all the live stream action. All right.
And if you didn't see Axanar Confidential last night, go back and watch it, because that conversation you had with
John Adcock.
That was fantastic.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, he's a great guy. A very interesting guy. So all right, everyone. We'll see you. Take care. Please be safe, and as always, wear your damn mask.
Take care, everyone.